Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to BiblioTech On Air. I am Ruby.
I'm Louie.
And I'm Romeo.
And today we are going to be talking about our Libros and Libations book, The Line Becomes a River by Francisco Cantú. In this book, chronicles his experience as a U.S. Border Patrol agent, offering a poignant exploration of the ethical dilemmas and emotional toll of enforcing immigration laws. The memoir intertwines personal narrative with reflections on the broader implications of border enforcement, highlighting the human cost of policies that divide families and communities. So Romeo's going to lead our questions today, discussion about this book.
Excellent. So first off, so what did you first think about the title of the book? Does it make sense with everything the book covers? And in particular, the line becomes a river, right? I mean, I think some people would assume the river is the line. So yesterday at book club, we talked about it being kind of poetic. So what are your thoughts about that? What did you think the title, did it make sense with everything that was talked about?
I think it kind of clicked for me fully by the epilogue of the book, because he does describe like going to like that area of the border and just like going into the river, and all of a sudden like it does not matter whether he's in the United States, doesn't matter if he's in Mexico, and he like literally is in the water and he's like the line is blurring. It's just kind of that process of like this hard boundary that we made up is now like he's now succumbing to like the actual natural border of like, and not on border at all, but like to like he's in the natural environment, and all of a sudden it doesn't matter what kind of border there is between nations because it's just all land.
It is.
You know,
he talks about in that scene, he talks about going underwater. He pops back up and he's like, I don't even know which country I'm in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's crazy.
Yeah. What did you think, Ruby?
I didn't think too much about the title, honestly. I was just like, okay, the line becomes a river. It's like that one other title, Imaginary Borderlines or something like that. That's how I thought of it. I was just like, yeah, I'm used to it. That's what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. So how did Cantu's personal background and upbringing shape his decision to join the Border Patrol? What aspects of his identity seem to conflict with that choice? So briefly, just for some context for our listeners, his mother was a park ranger. They grew up at parks. He talks about Big Bend. He talks about parks in New Mexico and Arizona. So that's what I mean by how did his personal background and upbringing shape his decision to join the Border Patrol, and what aspects of his identity seem to conflict with that choice?
I thought it was crazy because his mom was the one. Was it his mom or his dad that had the Mexican descent?
His mom. I think her father was German, but her mother was Mexican, or I could have it.
It's flipped.
Opposite,
her
right?
mother was German and her father was Mexican.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yes. And then just the fact that she was like very ashamed of that. And so I was surprised that he went to the Border Patrol, like for his reasoning too. His reasoning was just like, well, I want to go and experience it. Maybe in the future I'll like, create laws and things like that. I don't know. I thought it was interesting, his mother's background and how that influenced him.
Yeah. And I think there was he describes it as like a naivete like later on, where he's just like, well, I have the privilege of having the experience of being in both cultures in this way where I can go to the border and I can be there for people and speak to them in their native language, and I can relate with this, thinking that it's his kind act would make him like would actually bring some like light into these people's lives, which I'm sure in some ways they really did.
Sure.
Having people who can relate, but also just like it ends up kind of breaking him down because everything he does for people is kind of outweighed by the fact that he's also now complicit in the system of being a Border Patrol agent and having to arrest people,
Really quick. So we talked about this before we started recording, but a lot of people, and this is not to say, I mentioned to you guys, this is not to say that people don't or shouldn't have an opinion on the border, whether they're from there or not, but do you think his reasoning, like you mentioned, for wanting to understand it better, you could argue that he could have been a park ranger like his mom, he could have done other things, but really getting into the meat of what patrolling the border and being on the border day in and day out means, do you think, going to BP kind of made sense for his psyche, for his logic? I mean, I don't know.
I can't imagine like going down that route. Even I think like being a police officer, I'm like, you're just putting yourself out there. Your life is at risk. And then more so the Border Patrol. I can't imagine. I can see a person like who has empathy and wants to go and be like, well, I'll be that one person, that can, I guess, help and not
Sure.
be like these other ones that you hear horror stories about, you know, taking advantage of like their power and things like that. I don't know. It's crazy. I can't imagine having that kind of mindset.
Yeah. I think there is just kind of that pull of like, I can do something to benefit the system from the inside, or well, benefit people who are victims of the system from the inside, rather. And I feel like it is just so easy to have that mindset, but by the time that you're there, you can only do so much as an individual to fight against a system that is designed to dehumanize people that you are trying to be that one human connection to. There's only so much that I think you could take.
Yeah, and like I get it, because I think his mom says it too, kind of like she was a park ranger and she was like, I did it for the love of it, but then you kind of fall into the system of it, and where things like, even though being a park ranger sounds like fun and games, like there's the stress of it when you just see like what I guess maybe like funding being taken away, or just seeing how it's it's changing. That's where I see both of them kind of relating to as well.
So did your perspective on immigration, border enforcement, or human migration shift after reading this book?
Yeah, I'll admit I did not know a lot about the topic going in. Probably I did not know nearly enough, considering the fact that I've lived in Texas my entire life, and have been relatively close by to where things like this were happening my entire life, you know? And I have been very sympathetic in my eyes, but also there was so much about the reasoning behind people crossing the border that I did not know about. And also something as simple as, I want to go, in the case of Jose later on in the book, him just wanting to go be with his mother while she's dying and take care of her estate and stuff like that. Like, that decision of him being there for his family leads him to not be able to stay with his family later on the line. And it's something that we wouldn't even really, that I personally would not even think about, because I have the privilege of having been born a citizen, you know? And it's devastating that doing something for his family led to him having his life ruined by the system.
I liked, I feel like I was always, I guess, familiar with, you know, immigration stories. My father immigrated. He would tell me, like, he would show me if we were driving down to, oh my God, why can't I think of it? To Kickapoo. He'd be like, oh yeah, like I crossed over here, like in the dark through these streets. He wouldn't go into too much detail though, and I wouldn't pry. So like this kind of gave me more detail of like what his experience might have been. And it even made me think how in the end he describes as not all the people crossing are criminals, but the act of doing so continuously is making them like even more of a criminal. Like if they cross once, then they have to wait 30 days in the detention center. If they cross again, they have to wait like 60 days. And if they keep crossing, you know, that's just making it even more bad on their record.
Yeah. There is such like a divide between what is legal and what is ethical and right, you know? And just the fact that they are set up to be criminalized for something that, like, regardless if they were criminals beforehand or not, in a different sense, they are set up to be criminalized even with an otherwise clean record, you know? And it's just, it kind of feeds into itself, and that's very, you know, it's heartbreaking.
And then people kind of have the counter argument of, you know, we'll do it the right way. And doing it the right way, sure. I mean, you can certainly do that, but that in some cases is tons and tons of money. That's a decade, 12, 13, 14 years sometimes. You have to pass your citizenship test, all that stuff. And it's like, it's not set up for people to succeed or to get a status within, you know, 60, 90 days. It's like you're waiting years and years and years.
And even then you can be denied.
Correct. And then you can just be denied. After all that, it's like, well, too bad. You know, we're not honoring your citizenship or whatever. So it's pretty sad. So speaking of the humanity side of things, so how did you react emotionally to the stories of undocumented migrants in the book? Were there any that particularly stayed with you?
There are so many. One that did stick with me particularly was the two teenage boys and their uncle who died.
Same.
And them being like, well, can we take the body with us? Can we take the body with us back to Mexico?
Yeah.
Can we have it buried? And just knowing that no matter what Francisco, no matter what he could do in that moment as a Border Patrol agent, there was always going to be like, okay, but then there are like multiple systems and processes beyond what I can do for you, where your uncle's body is just going to go where it goes, and it might not even make it back to y'all. I can promise you that there will be a paper that you can fill out to get it back, but they may never give that to you. You know?
Yeah, that was very, very sad. One lighthearted one that I liked was when I guess a guy was wearing a weed hat, and one of the officers is like, "You think you're cool wearing that hat?" And he's like, "No, I didn't know. I just got this hat." My dad has the exact same story. He bought a weed hat, and like he didn't know what it was. And my brother was like, "Why are you wearing that hat? Where'd you get it?" He's like, "I just saw it and I bought it."
Yeah.
He's like, "No, that's drugs, Dad."
That's so the story that stuck with me is similar to it's the same one actually, but the reason why it stuck with me is because the two young boys were there. They were clearly with their uncle, and they talk about being separated from the group. But the fact that so it was on Native American land, so the tribal police had to come, and they didn't show up for like the whole day. So they left Hart. I don't know if it was Hart or Morales or whoever stayed behind with the other agent that stayed with the body, and he just had to stay there in the street. Like just the man was bloating and probably starting to stink a bit, and they couldn't do anything about it. Just a dead man there.
And it's also kind of speaks to like how common that ends up being, how that has to, something that would otherwise be a horrifying situation like that becomes your day to day. He's like, "I'm sorry that you had to stay with the body the whole time." And he's like, "Yeah, at least it doesn't smell yet." Like it's become so normalized because that's just what they have to do on a near daily basis, something to that extent or even more horrible.
It's crazy. So how does Cantu grapple with the morality of his role in border enforcement? Do you think he takes enough responsibility for the trauma he witnesses or participates in? And I want to be clear, he doesn't go into a lot of detail about him participating in things, but there's specific scenes where he talks about like they're ripping out clothes, they're peeing on them, they're cutting water, they're slashing their jugs so that they don't have anything to return to. So that's what I'm talking about.
I wonder because even and then he was saying like, but we have to do it so that way when they come back, they'll see their stuff messed up and know that the better choice is for them to just go back. Like they know that they're onto them or whatever.
Psychological.
Yeah. I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I think it haunts him very deeply. But and I feel like him in writing this is very much like him being like, there are certain things that you just have to do because you're on the job. And I feel like he experiences so much trauma and so much regret from so many things that he's done. But there's also a certain level that, like I said with the dead body thing, you do it enough times and it just becomes your normal because your brain just has to catch up and cope with the fact that like you may be doing terrible things, but it will do things to justify that. So you don't constantly go into like trauma response. And I feel like he had to deal with, I'm sure people in that sort of line of work have to do a lot, which is you have to kind of overwrite your sense of who you were and what your ethics were and where your moral compass was in order to continue doing your job and getting paid.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like he mentions this several times in this story. So this leads me to my next question. It's a good segue, but he says like, well, I'm just doing my job. I have to do my job. So is it possible to work within a system like the Border Patrol without becoming complicit in its harm?
No, I don't think so. Okay. I think that there are positions that you can be in where you are doing less harm, like whenever he was doing like more of like the data entry side of things. But ultimately, you are still participating in a system that is fundamentally set up to harm people, and it is a job, but it's also like you have to be aware of the fact, and the fact that your job contributes to the suffering of others. And that's just kind of baked into the thing.
Yeah. What do you think, Ruby?
Yeah, that's a good, I mean, I'm trying to think of like a way to argue that. Like how else would it be done then? Like what other kinds of people would they have doing this thing? And
I think it comes down to like I don't think the onus of fixing the system is on the individuals who participate in it. I think that it is a requirement of policy to be able to like change the system. And I know it takes very, very long, but in the meantime, people are going to keep going through and being cogs in the machine, you know, and that's just going to be the way that it is. And I don't think any of them are personally responsible for the overall harm, but they are participating in it, you know?
Yeah, I'm with you. So obviously in the book, you know, I know for those of you who might have just done the audiobook, if you only did the audio, it's actually broken up into 3 parts. So eventually, I think it's in the second part, it talks about how Cantu decided to leave the Border Patrol. So do you think that his decision to leave the Border Patrol came from moral clarity, emotional burnout, or both?
Probably both. I say more emotional burnout. And I think that either is a very valid reason to leave any profession, but especially this one.
Yeah.
I think he kind of starts... He is grappling with the morality of what he's doing throughout, but like I feel like he doesn't really start really diving into how it affected his moral compass until later.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say too, because I was like, wait, what? But he goes back. But then in the end, when he's dealing with the situation with Jose, I feel like that's where he's finally realizing his moral compass.
Yeah, the harm he caused. So I read a post, I guess publication interview he did. So this book was published in 2018. I think he was like 2019, 2020. They asked him a similar question. They said like, why did you, what was the, I guess the point where you said, I can't do this anymore. So he talks about in the book how he has those nightmares. He sees them in the desert. He sees it, but it was the grinding of the teeth.
Yeah.
So he said that when he went to his dentist, he talks about in the book how he's grinding them so bad, but he started having these ugly nightmares of him grinding his teeth out completely. And he realized like that is my point right there. That's my breaking point. I'm so stressed without even realizing it that it's detrimental to my overall health, you know?
Yeah.
That's pretty sad though. But so how does the second half of the book, particularly Cantu's friendship with Jose, shift the narrative? What does that relationship reveal about the human cost of immigration policy?
As I mentioned before, it was just Jose was going to see his mother when she was dying. And that was something that many people have the luxury of being able to do without having it completely upend your life. And I think just the outpouring of support for Jose's case from community members, from his family, from his children, I think it really goes to show that like even though he had probably one of the better chances out of anyone to be granted access back to the United States, it will still, without giving a single reason why, just kind of flippantly be like, no, but we're denying your case.
Yeah, just because, you know, whoever the caseworker was that day, it was just kind of like, I don't really care, you know? I mean, whatever the reasoning is, they don't have to give a reason. Just like, nope, denied.
It's crazy.
It's no dignity.
It's definitely, so really quick, so also another post, I think it was that same article, the interview he did, they asked him what happened to Jose, right? Because he doesn't mention at the end, he's talking to Jose at the end, Jose's talking about, you know, immigration, how he loves the United States, all this stuff. He alludes to the fact that Jose made it back because he said, listen, to tell you where he's at is puts him in danger.
Yeah.
So in other words, he's here, I think, but I can't tell you where he is.
That's nice.
Yeah. So he did make it back, I think, which is great because his kids, his sons and his wife were missing him.
Yes.
He was trying to contribute to society, help his kids have a better life. And like they mentioned in the story, his story alone is not unique. There's thousands, tens of thousands of people that go through that, but this is who Francisco Cantú encountered, and that just happened to be, you know, that person for him that was like, man, this guy's different.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the author's note, Cantú acknowledges the way he came to participate in a violent system / institution. Do you think Cantú bears any culpability for the work he did? And if so, does writing this book atone for any of it?
I think so. I think this book can open up a lot of eyes. Because, you know, like I said, you can argue like, well, like who's going to do the job or what, but it brings into a mindset like, well, it's the policy that needs to change. Even though you can try to go to this job with as much empathy as you have to be like, I'm going to help them, I'm going to talk to them, you know, I'm not going to be violent towards them. It's still wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I was not looking towards atonement necessarily because he did what he did and then later wrote a book that was very like revealing about the system that he participated in. His relationship with atonement is his own business. In my eyes, that's his own cross to bear.
Yeah.
But in terms of, did he ultimately do good in this world? I think that he did.
Yeah.
In terms of even on the job being a more familiar point of contact for people who were suffering, no matter what they ended up going through afterwards, also because he had arrested them and was part of that system, but also in making this book and sharing stories that are more vulnerable and paint people who are crossing the border in a much more like human light than, especially now, they are painted in the news and just I feel like he did good with this book.
I think so too. What I thought about too was I'm sure these are pseudonyms. I'm sure he changed people's names, but he put the entire institution of Border Patrol and Homeland Security on blast. Granted, he's not part of it anymore. He doesn't work there anymore, but he really opened up people's eyes, and there was a really good conversation. He came to San Antonio Book Festival that year, and I went to his talk, and I spoke to him. He knows the RGV, so he signed my book and everything. But he talks about that, how it's like, these were my friends. They're still my friends. I was part of that institution, but here I am.
Yeah.
Some of these guys love that job, and they're still there, and I'm totally just, blasting it. And I think he had to grapple with the fact that this story needs to be told regardless of what institution is being, put on blast. That way I have to say what I have to say, and he said it. So like you mentioned, it's his own cross to bear in terms of atonement, but I do think that he did good ultimately. So. So overall, what did you think of this book? Did you like it or dislike it, and would you recommend it to others?
I would definitely recommend it. It's a perspective a lot of people need to realize and read. I thought it was interesting. A lot of the negative reviews I read about the book was they just nitpicked on his grammar and things like that. I was like, really? I didn't even notice that, or like the way he would switch from like English to Spanish. But I was like, it's so crazy. I guess just the overall message of this book is very powerful and very interesting. Yeah.
So first of all, their dispatches are like vignettes. So I mean, he was probably journaling this the whole time. It's like chill,
I mean, I thought it was very well structured. I mean, he jumps really well between like personal anecdotes to like historical, like talks about the border to like things that he's heard and to his dreams. Like he makes a very clear divide, at least in my opinion. But either way, I would definitely recommend this book. It is very heavy, especially if you're very tied with the topic at hand.
Sure.
But I think the people who should be reading this book would not pick it up.
Yeah.
I agree.
I
agree. I agree.
And the less I say about that.
No, sure. No, I'm with you. I would recommend it. I think it's an important read. I think it opens up a lot of conversation, like you mentioned, and it certainly did around the time. I know he did a lot of talks across the country, just about what it is. But I think it opens people's eyes, and like you mentioned, probably not the eyes that should be open, but it's there.
I hope that it does help people get perspective though, and I feel like it is a good starting point if anyone is willing to read it who may think like who may have kind of more like twisted perspective on the humanity of people crossing the border and the situation at the border, especially now. I feel like if anybody is able to sit down and read it, it would cause some really good reflection.
Yeah, definitely.
Or I would certainly hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. He's not just some bird watcher on the border. He worked it.
Yeah.
He lived on it. He slept on it.
Arresting them.
Yeah.
Taking them back.
On the border for 4 years. So, I mean, he really has a good perspective.
Yeah. And as much as that like messed him up and it was like he was culpable in that system, it's also important that he did choose to do this with his time.
Yeah.
It's important that he chose to, if deriving meaning from any of the trauma that he endured and inflicted on others, is that he wants to get the word out about it.
I agree.
Definitely. Alrighty, so that was our discussion of The Line Becomes a River by Francisco Cantú. If you want to tune into our next Libros and Libations book, we will be reading Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. So definitely check that out. Available on Cloud Library.
Cloud Library, yes. It might be on Hoopla, but for sure on Cloud.
For sure on Cloud. Jeff, definitely check it out and talk to us next time at Libros and Libations at Burleson Yard Garden. So thanks for tuning in for today's talk. I am Ruby.
I'm Lewis.
And I'm Romeo.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you.